So a very good morning, dear students of class 11 and also the revising students of class 12. Today we are going to take up the next short story in the ISC English Literature syllabus, and this is story number 6 in your textbook, and the name of the story is The Chinese Statue, written by famous English author rather, Jeffrey Archer. And this short story comes from his book, A Quiver Full of Arrows. The cover of the book is visible on your screen right now. And next to it, you can see the little Chinese statue of Emperor Kung, which becomes the object of interest in this short story written by Jeffrey Archer. So now let us begin with the introduction of this story, but before the introduction, let us read a little bit about Jeffrey Archer and see what he looks like. So on your screen now, as I scroll up, you can see the portrait or the real photograph of British author Jeffrey Archer. This is your Jeffrey Archer, and he was born on 15th of April in 1940. An English author. He was an author and former politician. So he also achieved a knighthood. You can see now on your screen the particular page from your textbook coming up, where you have the introduction to Jeffrey Archer. Jeffrey Howard Archer, Baron Archer of Weston-super-Mare, born 15th of April 1940, is an English author and former politician. Before becoming an author, Archer was a member of parliament, that is from 1969 to 1974, but did not seek re-election after a financial scandal that left him almost bankrupt. Later, after a revival of his fortunes from the royalties of his best-selling novels, he became deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, the British Conservative Party, from 1985 to 1986. That is for 1 year, before resigning after another scandal. So it seems that scandal never leaves him, which would lead to the end of his career in elected office. He was made a life peer in 1992. His political career ended with his conviction and subsequent imprisonment. So he had to go to jail. He was found guilty, and he was ultimately jailed for 2 years from 2001 to 2003 for perjury. Perjury is when you are under oath and you don't carry out your responsibilities when you are under oath, when you hold an office. So for that, and perverting the course of justice, which followed his second resignation. So this was about his political career. Now we are not concerned much about his political career as we are about his writings. So Archer was first recognized as a literary figure after the publication of his first book, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, which was published in 1976. The Cain and Abel series is Archer's best known work. An author to a couple of plays and more than 25 books for adults and children, Archer's latest novel is the last of a new series titled The Clifton Chronicles. His books have sold around 330 million copies worldwide. Archer's short stories reveal a remarkable range. Now we come to the story, this one as well as other short stories written by Archer. His short stories reveal a remarkable range and skill. His stories are full of riveting suspense, surprise denouements, that is, falling actions, and unforgettable storylines. So this is quote unquote, which means this must have been the observation of some critic of Jeffrey Archer. Sly reflections on human nature are at the center of tales that often have surprise endings. So somewhat similar to O. Henry's writing style. This story too has a surprise ending, and it's a very long short story rather. It has about 14 pages. So you have to bear with me. I'll be making a total of at least 3 videos, if not more, so that we can squeeze in to our 1 hour time slot where we need to do also live sessions and we need to take the attendance. So anyway, a quiver full of arrows. You just saw the book cover on the first screen which I showed. A quiver full of arrows, a collection of 12 of Archer's short stories, was published in 2006. So 2006, and we are reading this in 2021. The opening story, the very first story in that book, is the Chinese statue, and now it is about the story which we get to see here, is about the journey of a statue of Emperor Kung acquired by Sir Alexander Heathcote, a British diplomat, when he was posted in China. So this was your introduction to Jeffrey Archer. This was your the background of the short story which we are going to take up now. So now let's take a look at the text of the story. So the Chinese statue by Jeffrey Archer. The little Chinese statue was the next item to come under the auctioneer's hammer. So it seems that somebody, maybe the narrator, is at the auction house where an auction is taking place and various antique items are being sold off to the highest bidder. So the little Chinese statue, the one which I tried to show on the cover, or rather in the beginning on the first screen itself, so something similar to that. So that is just for an understanding that I have put it there. So this was this little Chinese statue. Lot 103 caused those quiet murmurings that always precede or come before the sale of a masterpiece. What is a masterpiece? Something which is unique, something which is the greatest piece of work, artistic work of any famous artist. So the auctioneer's assistant held up the delicate piece of ivory for the packed audience to admire, while the auctioneer glanced around the room to be sure he knew where the serious bidders were seated. Serious bidders are the ones who will seriously give calls, do the bidding, and ultimately perhaps one of them will buy the item which is put up for auction. So even the man who is with the hammer in his hand, calling out each item and asking bidders to bid, even that man and his assistant, they were trying to locate the serious bidders where they were particularly seated. I studied my catalog and read the detailed description of the piece. Now what happens is, if you go to buy something at an auction, they will give you a booklet or a catalog with the photographs of the different items that are being put up at the auction and a brief history as well as the tentative price of the item. So the narrator says that he leafed through the catalog and read the detailed description of the piece. Which piece? The little Chinese statue, and what was known of its history. So what did he find? This is his finding. The statue had been purchased in Halichuan in 1871 and was referred to as what Sotheby's quaintly described as the property of a gentleman. Sotheby's is the name of the company which ran this auction house, or the ones who were actually auctioning this little statue. And how did they describe this particular Chinese statue? Well, they said that it's the property of a gentleman. This quote unquote was mentioned for this particular statue in the catalog, usually meaning that some member of the aristocracy did not wish to admit that he was having to sell off one of the family heirlooms. So usually this was a method by means of which a renowned aristocratic family generally tried to hide its identity and its ownership of a particular product when they have to sell off something which is part of their family treasure. So that's the reason why this kind of quote unquote had been used. So I wondered if that was the case on this occasion and decided to do some research to discover what had caused the little Chinese statue to find its way into the auction rooms on that Thursday morning over 100 years later. So if this statue was purchased in 1871 in Halichuan, which is a place in China, how come it was being put up for auction 100 years later? That means in 1970s. Why was it being put up? So what could possibly be the reason behind it? So once again, the call is being given. Lot number 103, declared the auctioneer. What am I bid? What am I bid for this magnificent example of ... So the description goes on like they always do. So that is irrelevant. What is important is the call is being given. Now let's see if somebody is bidding for it. Sir Alexander Heathcote, as well as being a gentleman, was an exact man. Now, from here begins the flashback. What exactly had happened 100 years ago? So, Sir Alexander Heathcote had been the original owner, British owner of this Chinese statue. Who was he and what was he? Let's find out. Well, he was known to be an exact man as well as being a gentleman. So he was not only a gentleman, from his name itself it is clear his name is preceded by the knighthood title, that is Sir. So he was awarded knighthood by the British Crown. So he was no doubt an aristocratic gentleman, and he was very punctual, an exact man to be precise. He was exactly 6'3" and a quarter inches tall. So that is, if you call exactness, well, that was his height. Rose at 7 o'clock every morning. So 7 o'clock, not 7:30, not 6:45, but 7 o'clock every morning. Joined his wife at breakfast to eat one boiled egg cooked for precisely 4 minutes. It should be cooked for 4 minutes. This boiled egg, precisely, exactly 4 minutes. And 2 pieces of toast with 1 spoonful of Cooper's marmalade. What is marmalade? It's nothing but a kind of jam or jelly. And drink 1 cup of China tea, because tea in the world was brought in by China. We got tea from China too. India did not have tea gardens before tea arrived from China. So China, as everyone knows, is the country where tea was for the first time found to be growing in abundance, and they made tea and they had tea and they discovered it, they made it, they had it, and then gradually the rest of the world came to know about it. So Sir Alexander Heathcote, he preferred having a cup of Chinese tea. He would then take a hackney carriage. What's a hackney carriage? It's a horse-drawn carriage, very commonly used as, you could say, a cab in London in the 1800s, before the automobile came into being. So he would then take a hackney carriage from his home in Cadogan Gardens at exactly 8:20 and arrive at the Foreign Office. Foreign Office is the office of the ambassador of a country. It's the Foreign Ministry department from where ambassadors to different countries are deployed. So he used to work in the Foreign Office. So exactly at 8:20 and not at 8:21, not at 8:19, he would every day, each and every day, he would arrive at his Foreign Office. 8:20 he would leave, and at the Foreign Office he would arrive at 8:59, returning home again on the stroke of 6 o'clock. So he would go to his office at 8:20 in the morning, arrive at his office at 8:59, and arrive back home from office every day at 6 o'clock in the evening. So this was the exactness of Sir Alexander Heathcote. Sir Alexander had been exact from an early age, as became or as was suitable for the only son of a general. But unlike his father, he chose to serve his queen in the diplomatic service. So, all government officers, diplomats, servants, they are actually serving the queen. In England, the queen is the supreme authority, and all government officials, high-ranking officials, low-ranking officials, all are actually answerable and responsible to the Queen of the country. So, his father, Sir Alexander Heathcote's father, was an army general in the Royal Army, Royal British Army, but he had decided to serve the Queen in a different capacity. And what was that capacity? In the diplomatic service. So, he had joined the diplomatic service as a diplomat. And diplomats are kind of not just politicians, they are the ones who actually keep the ball rolling and communications going between different nations. So, he joined the diplomatic service, another exacting calling. So, even that was a very exact call suitable for him and only him. He progressed. So, do you notice the fine humor in these lines as Geoffrey Archer describes Alexander Heathcote? So, he progressed from a shared desk at the Foreign Office in Whitehall to third secretary in Calcutta. So, in those days, 1870s, India was under British rule and much of Africa too. So, there were many British colonies, and British officers were deployed from Britain to these colonies of England, and India was no exception. And remember that before Delhi, Calcutta was the capital of the country. So the British had initially made Calcutta the capital, and they had actually made use of town planning and British architecture to build the buildings of Calcutta, some of which you can still see, old buildings. They are really very beautiful if you go to Calcutta. So this is where he came. He got his promotions, and eventually he became the third secretary, and he came to Calcutta to second secretary in Vienna. And from Calcutta, when he was transferred, he was sent next as an ambassador, as a diplomat to Vienna. Vienna is in Austria, and that is when he got a promotion, and he had become a second secretary to first secretary in Rome. And finally, after that, he became the first secretary, and with that promotion, he went to Rome. Rome is in Italy. Then from there on to deputy ambassador in Washington. So he is rising to the rank of deputy ambassador, and he goes to the United States. And finally to minister in Peking. Finally, he became a minister, a foreign ambassador, a full-fledged ambassador you could say, and he was sent to China. Peking is the old name for Beijing. In the 1870s, Beijing, the capital of China, was called Peking. The name changed subsequently. In the 20th century, they renamed it and they called it Beijing. So he was delighted when Mr. Gladstone invited him to represent the government in China, as he had for some considerable time taken more than an amateur interest in the art of the Ming dynasty. Now, the Ming dynasty of China is very famous for its pottery, very famous for its statues and various other artifacts and artistic objects. So a very ancient dynasty you could say. And Sir Alexander Heathcote was very keenly interested in the Ming dynasty and artifacts from the Ming dynasty. So when he got this opportunity to represent his country as an ambassador and go to Beijing or Peking and become the representative of the Queen there, Queen of England there, so he immediately took the opportunity and he decided to go. This crowning appointment in his distinguished career would afford him what until then he would have considered impossible: an opportunity to observe in their natural habitat some of the great statues, paintings, and drawings which he had previously been able to admire only in books. Now, that was not the era of the internet. Today, sitting at home, I could download those images of the cover page of the book A Quiver Full of Arrows, or maybe the photograph of Jeffrey Archer, or maybe the Chinese statue which you saw in the opening screen of this video. So it was possible. Now it is possible, quite possible, but in those times, in 1870s, it was not possible. So if somebody took interest in any particular subject, the person would basically leaf through relevant books, do some library work, do some research, and that couldn't possibly be done sitting at home with the help of the internet. One had to visit libraries, take library memberships, and things like that. So anyway, he had been reading about the paintings and statues of the Ming Dynasty in different books and had been admiring them. But now, for the first time, he knew he was going to get the opportunity to see these things with his own eyes directly by going to China. And so he accepted the offer of becoming the British ambassador to China. When Sir Alexander arrived in Peking after a journey by sea and land that took his party nearly 2 months. Now remember, that was not an era when airliners connected different corners of the world. Traveling was from one country to another, especially long distance travel, was usually done by sea. So he had to sail with his officials, and it took him nearly 2 months to reach China from England by ship. He presented his seals patent to the Empress. Now, China in those days had a queen too. Just as in England there was a queen, so also in China. And who was the queen in England? Queen Victoria. Again, I need to refer to Calcutta, because Calcutta, which is now called Kolkata, is famous for the Victoria Memorial. Many of you could have possibly seen it. It's a building which is built in memory of Queen Victoria after she passed away. So Victoria Memorial, the name itself is suggestive of that fact. Now, Queen Victoria was the queen or the monarch of England at the time when Sir Alexander went to China, and there the queen was Empress Yu Si. How will you pronounce Yu? That is, you don't pronounce the T and you don't pronounce the H. So you just have to say Yu Si. Now that's quite a tongue twister. Anyway, you can practice at home. And a personal letter. So not only did he present his seals as an official British ambassador, he also presented personal letter for her private reading from Queen Victoria. So Queen Victoria had written a letter to Queen Yu Si of China. So that was the letter he presented to her. The Empress, dressed from head to toe in white and gold, received her new ambassador in the throne room of the Imperial Palace. Okay, so Royal Palace of China in Peking, and the Empress is seated on her throne. Sir Alexander Heathcote and his subordinates, they arrive, and he presents the letter, he presents his official documents. And what does the Queen do? She reads the letter after that. She read the letter from the British monarch while Sir Alexander remained standing to attention. Her Imperial Highness revealed nothing of its contents to the new minister, only wishing him a successful term of office in his appointment. She then moved her lips slightly up at the corners, which Sir Alexander judged correctly to mean that the audience had come to an end. So a queen does not need to speak. She just raised a corner of her lip to indicate that that's the end of the meeting. So he was free to go. As he was conducted, well, he of course did not know his way around, so he had some escorts there, some Chinese people, officers who were conducting him or escorting him around. So as he was conducted back through the great halls of the Imperial Palace by a Mandarin is a Chinese man, kind of guide, you could say, in the long court dress of black and gold, Sir Alexander walked as slowly as possible. Why was he walking slowly? Well, with his eyes, he was admiring the beautiful statues and other aspects of Chinese architecture in the imperial palace of the Queen of China. So he was walking slowly, taking in the magnificent collection of ivory and jade statues. Jade is a green stone, and ivory, of course, is obtained from the tusk of elephants. So it's pale yellowish white. So ivory and jade statues were all around. So you can understand it's a royal palace, which were scattered casually around the building, much in the way Cellini and Michelangelo today lie stacked against each other in Florence. If you go to Florence in Italy, it's the seat of art and culture. Artists in particular, all the best artists of the world can possibly be found in Florence in Italy. And there you will see stacked up, piled up paintings of Cellini and Michelangelo. So it's not difficult to find so many precious pieces of art all put together in one place, just like that, scattered here and there, if you go to a place like Florence. Similarly, in this Royal Imperial Palace of China, one could see such ivory and jade statues. So anyway, let's see what happens. We have finished with page 60. We're moving on to page 61. As his ministerial appointment was for only 3 years, Sir Alexander took no leave. So as he was appointed for a period of or a term of 3 years only, Sir Alexander decided he will not take any leave. Rather, he will utilize all these 3 precious years in service as foreign ambassador to the maximum. He will utilize, because he has to do a lot of sightseeing, lot of he wants to go to places, he wants to see all those historical buildings and structures and statues and paintings and architecture that he could possibly see during his stay in China, because he knew that there was no coming back. After 3 years he had to leave. So he took no leave, he decided, but preferred to use his time to put the embassy behind him and travel on horseback into the outlying districts to learn more about the country and its people. On these trips, he was always accompanied by a Mandarin from the palace staff who acted as interpreter and guide. Now, of course, Chinese language is a very difficult language for a British man to learn and master. And within a span of 3 years, nobody could possibly, unless one really extensively studied Chinese, it was difficult, especially when you are holding such an important office and you have so many other official obligations, to learn a language. So, and initially, because he's completely new in China, he doesn't know his way around. Plus, he cannot communicate with the people of China because the Chinese people don't speak English. China was never a British colony, so they simply don't bother about English. It's just another foreign language for them. The same way, so that's the reason why a Mandarin or this Chinese guide was provided to him, who was a member of the palace staff, and he acted as interpreter. That means the one who helped translate so that he could communicate with the common people. So this man knew English, so he would translate English to Chinese and Chinese to English, and would work as both a guide as well as an interpreter. On one such journey, passing through the muddy streets of a small village, so he was passing through the muddy streets of a small village with but a few houses called Hali Chuan, so that was the name of the place, a distance of some 50 miles from Peking. So he had left the foreign embassy office where he was deployed as an officer, as an ambassador, and he had traveled 50 miles from Peking. He had reached this village called Hali Chuan. Sir Alexander chanced upon an old craftsman's working place. What happened? He came upon an old craftsman's working place where he was working. This craftsman, he was an old Chinese man. Leaving his servants, the minister dismounted from his horse and entered the ramshackle wooden workshop. Ramshackle is something which is not very well maintained, broken, and kind of a poor hut sort of a thing. So it was a wooden building, wooden structure, not exactly a building, it was a hut kind of thing. And there was this workshop inside. to admire the delicate pieces of ivory and jade that crammed the shelves from floor to ceiling. So this craftsman, he was a specialist. He made statues or carved statues and other things out of jade and ivory, out of stones. And inside his workshop, there were racks which were full of these materials. Although modern, the pieces were superbly executed by an experienced craftsman. So it was, some of those were not just materials, they were finished goods. And the excellence of craftsmanship could be felt by anyone looking at them. And the minister entered the little hut with the thought of acquiring a small memento of his journey. So he decided, like people do normally when they go to some exotic place, they try to collect some kind of memento so that they can bring back with them, and then later on it will keep, they'll keep it as a memory of that journey. So that is what he wanted to do. Once in the shop, he could hardly move in any direction for fear of knocking something over. Now, all these delicate items are inside the shop, so he could hardly move. The building had not been designed for a 6'3¼ visitor. Of course not. Chinese people are shorter in height. As a result, this hut was much smaller than what he had expected, and he was a heavy and hefty man and a very tall man, 6'3¼ inches tall. So naturally, he had to be very careful with his arms and legs because he could knock down some artifact and destroy something by mistake or accidentally. Sir Alexander stood still, enthralled. He was totally enthralled, means totally spellbound. Amazed, so amazed that he was spellbound, taking in the fine scented jasmine smell that hung in the air. He was breathing the smell of jasmine which was in the air inside that cottage. An old craftsman bustled forward in a long blue coolie robe and flat black hat to greet him. So that is the traditional dress the Chinese wore, maybe perhaps in those times. So this man comes forward to greet him. A jet black plaited pigtail fell down his back. Now remember, Chinese people in the olden times, both men and women kept long hair, and both men and women usually wore similar types of dresses, that is pajamas, and the upper garment going with that, and had long hair in pigtails tied up behind them, plaited pigtail. He bowed. It should be bowed. It's printed as bowled. So please make your correction in your textbook. He bowed very low and then looked up at the giant from England. Who is the giant from England? Sir Alexander Heathcote, of course. The minister returned the bow while the Mandarin explained who Sir Alexander was and his desire to be allowed to look at the work of the craftsman. So the Mandarin, the interpreter, he explained to the Chinese craftsman that this is Sir Alexander Heathcote. He is the foreign ambassador. He's a minister. He's from a foreign country, and he has come to your place. He wants to admire your work and he wants to look around. So he explained that to this man in Chinese. The old man was nodding his agreement even before the Mandarin had come to the end of his request. Okay, so he was agreeing to it. He was nodding, yes, yes, okay, fine, no problem. For over an hour, the minister sighed and chuckled. Chuckled means laughed from time to time by making throaty noises as he saw the different things and he admired them. As he studied many of the pieces with admiration and finally returned to the old man to praise his skill. The craftsman bowed once again. Now, the Chinese, they have the tendency to bow again and again. So they don't do handshake. They bow. They put their hands together like that and they just bend forward. So that's what he did again and again. And his shy smile revealed no teeth but only genuine pleasure at Sir Alexander's compliments. Pointing a finger to the back of the shop, he beckoned the two important visitors to follow him. They did so and entered a veritable Aladdin's cave. So we have finished with that page. That was page 61. We are moving on to page 62. So just behind the workshop, there was Aladdin's cave. That means an amazing place, much more amazing than what the workshop was. with row upon row of beautiful miniature emperors and classical figures. The minister could have happily settled down in the orgy of ivory for at least a week. So Sir Alexander Heathcote was so highly impressed and engrossed and totally amazed and taken aback by what he saw in this next room, the adjacent room, that he could have spent an entire week sitting there and admiring these beautiful statues. Sir Alexander and the craftsman chatted away to each other through the interpreter, and the minister's love and knowledge of the Ming dynasty was soon revealed. Now he talked about his interest in the Ming dynasty. The little craftsman's face lit up with this discovery, and he turned to the Mandarin and in a hushed voice made a request. The Mandarin nodded his agreement and translated. I have, Your Excellency, a piece of Ming myself that you might care to see. A piece of Ming means I have, Your Honor, in my possession I have a statue from the Ming dynasty. And if you want to see it, I can show it to you. A statue that has been in my family for over 7 generations. Who is saying this? This old Chinese man, through the interpreter, says this to Sir Alexander Heathcote. I should be honored, said the minister. Who? Sir Alexander. It is I who would be honored, Your Excellency, said the little man, who thereupon scampered out of the back door. He left the cottage using the back door, nearly falling over a stray dog. There was a dog outside. He didn't notice. He stumbled over the dog and onto an old peasant house a few yards behind the workshop. So there was another old peasant house. Peasant house in the sense, normally the kind of houses in which peasants and other working class people lived in those times in China. So old peasant house a few yards behind the workshop. That was probably his home. This was his workshop and that was his home. The minister and the Mandarin remained in the back room, for Sir Alexander knew the old man would never have considered inviting an honored guest into his humble home until they had known each other for many years, and only then after he had been invited to Sir Alexander's home first. So that is what Sir Alexander thought. That was maybe not the case, but then that is how he was thinking. A few minutes passed before the little blue figure came trotting back, pigtail bouncing up and down on his shoulders. He was now clinging on to something that from the very way he held it close to his chest had to be a treasure. The craftsman passed the piece over to the minister to study. Sir Alexander's mouth opened wide and he could not hide his excitement. The little statue, not more than 6 inches in height, was of the Emperor Kung and as fine an example of Ming as the minister had seen. Sir Alexander felt confident that the maker, that means the craftsman who had made this statue, was the great Pen Q. Pen Q was a very famous sculptor during the time of Emperor Kung. So who had been patronized by the emperor, so that the date must have been around the turn of the 15th century. The statue's only blemish. So this statue must have dated back to the early 15th century. That means 1401, 1402, and Sir Alexander Heathcote. Now this time, unity of time needs to be very clear to all of you. Sir Alexander Heathcote is in China in the 1870s. You can say he's there in 1871, and he finds a statue which belongs to the era of the Ming dynasty, made by famous sculptor Pen Q, in the possession of this old Chinese man. And Sir Alexander Heathcote, who has done extensive research on the Ming dynasty and on Pen Q and their craftsmanship, he can guess that this statue should be at least from the beginning of the 15th century. The statue's only blemish was that the only minus point of this statue, only thing which was negative about this statue was that the ivory base on which such pieces usually rest was missing. So the ivory piece, the pedestal of the statue. So any statue needs to be fixed on a base. So the base has to be a little heavier so that it can hold the statue, and it has to be fixed on the base. So that base was missing. Otherwise, the statue was beautiful and intact. So this is where we will be stopping, page 62, and we will continue with the second part of the video in our next class. So I hope so far it is clear enough to you, you have understood. And as I told you, please read the notes which are provided in the workbook, because those are very important. Just remember that this short story talks about human nature, talks about deception, talks about a surprise ending, and we will discuss all these things by and by as we read the rest of the text in our next two videos. So until then, thank you all. Thank you very much.